Materials Design and Modern Principle Approaches. Course Materials Design, School of Education Sciences, UNAT 2018. What should ELT materials have? ELT materials should give students the opportunity to use authentic language in real contexts and for the purposes of communication. They should expose the student to real-life scenarios, to new language structures, and to different types of language, written or spoken language. So, teaching materials should include language that is realistic, that is used in real life situations, and that is the language that is used by native speakers, so that way learners could have real contact with the language and would learn real communicative skills. It is important that these materials expose students to samples of language, such as written or spoken language, so that students could practice their reading, writing, and listening skills. Basically, teaching materials should be engaging, should keep students motivated, and they should, of course, teach the basic elements of language that the students need to communicate. Principled approaches to the development of ELT materials. The first principle: ELT materials should provide the students with samples of authentic language, which means language that native speakers would use in real life, which is authentic, genuine, and realistic. So again, this principle talks about how teaching materials should include language that is realistic and authentic, so students can have true understanding of the language, and they are so they can be able to communicate with native speakers as well. Principle number 2: they should present teaching materials should present language items and language structures through pieces of spoken and written text, which in time help learners practice and gain experience in different aspects of the language. New language structures can be implicitly learned by the student, especially when they encounter them many times while using or experiencing the language. So, frequent exposition to language allows students to encounter patterns of language that they little by little identify and become aware of, so that way they learn grammar structures implicitly or completely unaware until they become aware of it. Those language structures are found in written and as well as in spoken language. So it is important that teaching materials expose items and structures of language in various ways, especially within texts and in all genres of language. The third principle: such materials should be engaging and appealing, captivating the interest and curiosity of the learner. They should be based on a project or task activity to keep the student focused, motivated, and active during development. Task-based and text-based activities also should give some meaning, context, and consistency to each subject being studied. In this principle, we see that teaching materials should be attractive and appealing to students. They should raise the interest and curiosity of the learner, so that way they could learn more effectively and they will be motivated. They will have a reason to study and they will understand by context. It is important that these activities explain some of the activities and its purposes. The fourth principle: ELT materials should provide samples of language with sufficient supporting information in order to provide the student with enough context and realism. This should help students understand the language by understanding their context, therefore producing a more meaningful learning. Basically, every time students are exposed to a piece of language, context should be provided. That additional information about the actors and the reasons and the environment, all the information surrounding a sample of language should be provided so the student would understand in which case, in which scenario, in which context that piece of language is used. It is so important because sometimes there are ambiguities and there are things that lead to confusion unless further information is provided. It is important to provide that extra information. The fifth principle teaches about the emotional and psychological aspects of learning that should be considered during the designing of teaching material. If students connect emotionally with the material, it is more likely that they would learn by making relations between the items of language found in the materials and the emotions the same materials evoke on them, even if those are feelings of sadness, anger, etc., as well as feelings of empathy, joy, satisfaction, peace, etc. So the emotional aspects of learning are important because if students are able to make a relation between what they feel and the piece of language that they're exposed to, they can make a mental connection, and that is a way of learning more effectively because that's similar to the way we learn our native language. So if we evoke or if our material evoke emotions in students while exposing the students to pieces of language and new concepts, students are able to make that relationship between the emotions and the meanings, and therefore producing a more effective learning. In conclusion, teaching materials, beyond transmitting samples of language with new language structures and vocabulary, they should provide meaning and context, written and spoken pieces of language, raise the interest and curiosity of students, and should also consider learning through emotional, situational, and realistic approaches, and fostering of the use of language for communicative purposes. That's all, and thanks for watching.